Fun fact, in Indiana, the state insect is the firefly. And as far as insects go, I think that's pretty cool. Although I may be a little biased since I happen to be from Indiana myself. But one fact that's not fun is that a landlord in Indiana may have to deal with the occasional eviction. In the process, tenants have to uproot their lives, and landlords can miss out on thousands of dollars of rental income. But sometimes, there just aren't any other options. If you're an Indiana landlord who needs to evict a tenant, it's really important to follow the right steps. If you try to evict someone improperly, you could face stiff fines and penalties, and the tenant will likely get to remain inside the unit. But don't worry, because we've got you covered. This video will tell you everything you need to know about the right way to evict a tenant in Indiana. But as a disclaimer, we're not lawyers and this is not legal advice. You need to do your own research when you're going through a situation just like this. All right, let's get into it. The first thing you need to do when evicting someone is to make sure you have a legally valid reason for doing so. And in Indiana, there are 4 main justifications for doing an eviction. First, landlords can evict tenants that fail to pay rent as long as they have complied with any grace periods referred to in the tenant's lease. However, before the eviction process can start, the landlord has to give a tenant a 10-day notice to pay. You're only allowed to begin formal court proceedings for an eviction if the sum remains unpaid at the end of the 10-day period. You can also evict someone for a non-financial violation of their lease. That might include smoking in non-smoking areas or keeping pets in pet-free properties. The law states that landlords must provide tenants with a reasonable notice to resolve the issue before beginning formal eviction proceedings. Now, reasonable is not defined, but it can vary based on the nature of the violation. For example, smoking in non-smoking areas can typically be fixed right away, but finding another home for a pet can take time. The third reason to evict someone in Indiana is if the tenant has engaged in illegal behavior on the property. The kind of notice you have to give a tenant in this situation depends on the nature of the crime. For example, if a tenant is guilty of prostitution, their lease can be canceled immediately. But if they're guilty of consuming or selling illegal substances, then you'll have to issue a 45-day notice to vacate. Finally, the last reason to evict a tenant is if their lease expires naturally and you don't offer them a new one. Now, if this was a month-to-month lease, then you have to provide a 30-day notice to leave the property. But if this was an annual lease, then you'll have to give a 90-day notice. Okay, so that sums up the reasons that you're allowed to evict a tenant in Indiana. Now let's take a look at the actual process for carrying out the eviction. Here are the step-by-step instructions for completing an eviction. The first thing that you need to do is let the tenant know that they're being evicted and that they should leave the unit as soon as possible. This gives the tenant the opportunity to voluntarily give you the unit back in order to avoid a court case. We'll put a link in the description of this video to an online tool that will help you create a proper notice to comply with step-by-step instructions. Just note that there is a small fee for using the tool, but it's definitely worth paying for since it'll ensure that you don't make any mistakes with the paperwork, which could force you to restart the entire eviction process from the beginning. Once you've given your notice to comply, you need to give the tenant some time to honor the request. If they don't, then you're ready to file an official complaint with the court system. To do this, you need to find the justice court in the jurisdiction where your property is located. You can visit their website to learn their rules for filing a complaint, since they can change district by district. Follow the rules set by the court, pay any associated fees they require, and your complaint will officially be on the docket. With your court case in motion, the next step is to make the tenant aware of the charges against them. This is called serving the tenant. It's an official process that must be done according to the court standards. Now, there are a few different ways to serve a tenant with the notice. A court official can deliver the summons and complaint to them in person, or the server can mail the documents to the tenant via certified mail. Lastly, an official copy of the document can be posted to the tenant's front door. But please note that if you use this last option, you'll still have to mail the documents to the tenant. One big thing to keep in mind here is that neither the landlord nor the lawyer is allowed to serve the tenant. You have to get the court official to complete the step on your behalf. Now, all that's left to do is file your motion for repossession of the rental unit. To be successful, you need to provide a valid reason for evicting the tenant with evidence to back it up. For example, a rental payment history for the unit can be used to show missing payments. Security footage or complaints from other tenants can be used to show violations of the lease terms and criminal violations as well. Often, a tenant won't fight the allegations you make against them. In that case, you will win by default, and the court will order the tenant to give you control of the property. If the tenant does try to fight the eviction, then you may be asked to provide more evidence to counter their version of events. Either way, once you win, you'll get a writ of execution, which gives the tenant a maximum of 48 to 72 hours to vacate the property. Just note that you can't remove the tenant by force. Only a sheriff can do that. Alright, so we've covered all the big stuff, but you may still have some lingering questions about evicting one of your tenants. So let's answer some of those right now. You cannot force a tenant to move out yourself. You have to go through the appropriate legal process as covered in this video. And if at the end your tenant still won't leave, you'll need to get the sheriff involved to make them. If you try to force a tenant to move out on your own, you can get sued for actual damages plus violations. Now, we definitely don't want that to happen. That's why it's super important to make sure that you follow all the appropriate steps for an eviction. Now, on average, it can take between 2 weeks and 4 months to evict a tenant in Indiana. Some cases, like a missing rental payment that is not contested by the tenant, are open and shut. But others, like a potential drug violation that the tenant contests in court, can take some time to complete. Keeping good evidence is the best way to increase your chances of winning your eviction case. Our all-in-one platform keeps every document in the same place and maintains detailed tenant histories automatically, so you won't have to worry about losing any of your documents again. If you're interested, you can sign up for a free demo at doorloop.com to learn more. So there you have it. We hope you found this video helpful if you're dealing with an eviction in Indiana. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos just like this, and we'll see you next time.